There will be moments in your life when everything feels too heavy, moments when you're tired of being strong, when the future feels uncertain and the past won't let go. And in those moments, motivation won't save you, comfort won't save you, positive thinking won't save you. What will save you is the ability to stand still in the chaos and face it. This isn't about pretending life is easy. It's about learning how to face life when it's at its hardest. Number 1, pain is not a signal to quit. Pain is not a signal to quit. It feels like one, and that's why it's so dangerous. When pain shows up, your mind immediately starts negotiating an exit. It tells you this is too much, that something has gone wrong, that continuing will only make things worse. Pain convinces you that stopping is wisdom, but most of the time, pain isn't warning you of danger. It's marking the edge of growth. It appears precisely at the point where comfort ends and transformation begins, and that's why it feels unbearable. If quitting were the right response, pain would arrive after the damage was done. Instead, it arrives right before you become stronger. The mistake people make is assuming that pain means failure. In reality, pain often means resistance, and resistance is what you encounter when you're moving in the right direction. Nothing meaningful is built without friction. Discipline hurts, honesty hurts, change hurts. Facing your own weaknesses hurts more than pretending they don't exist. Pain shows up when you stop lying to yourself, when you stop taking the easy way out, when you decide to confront something you've been avoiding for years. Quitting at that moment doesn't save you. It sends you back to the same place you were trying to escape. Pain also strips away illusions. It removes the fantasy that life is supposed to be smooth, fair, or emotionally comfortable. When pain enters your life, it exposes what you rely on for stability. If everything collapses the moment it becomes uncomfortable, then what you had wasn't strength, it was convenience. Pain forces you to discover what remains when excuses stop working. It demands clarity, it demands presence, and it demands responsibility. These demands feel cruel only because they remove the option of avoidance. There is a quiet power in staying when pain tells you to leave, not in dramatic gestures, but in endurance. In continuing to show up while everything in you is screaming for relief. This kind of persistence doesn't make you hardened. It makes you precise. You begin to understand the difference between pain that destroys and pain that shapes. One empties you, the other concentrates you. The problem is they feel almost identical in the moment, and only time reveals which one you're dealing with. Most people never find out what they're capable of because they interpret pain too quickly. They assume discomfort is the end of the road rather than the doorway. They quit before the lesson arrives, before the strength organizes itself, before the chaos turns into something coherent. Pain stays long enough to teach you something essential about yourself, how much you can carry, how steady you can become, how little you actually need to keep moving forward. Number 2, responsibility creates stability. Responsibility creates stability because it gives you something solid to stand on when everything else feels uncertain. When life becomes chaotic, the instinct is to look outward for answers, to wait for circumstances to change, for people to rescue you, for clarity to arrive before you act. But instability grows in that waiting. Responsibility pulls you out of that paralysis by narrowing your focus. It asks a simple question: what is yours to carry right now? When you answer that honestly, the noise quiets. Even if the burden is heavy, it is defined, and a defined weight is easier to bear than shapeless fear. Avoiding responsibility feels like relief in the short term, but it creates long-term fragility. The more you push ownership away, the more unpredictable life becomes. You begin reacting instead of acting, drifting instead of moving with intention. Responsibility does the opposite. It anchors you to reality. It forces you to engage with what is actually in front of you instead of what you wish were different. That engagement creates order, not because the world suddenly becomes fair, but because you have chosen a position within it. Stability isn't the absence of problems, it's the presence of direction. There is also dignity in responsibility that no amount of comfort can replace. When you accept responsibility, you stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and start seeing yourself as a participant in your own life. That shift changes how you experience pressure. Stress becomes something you manage instead of something that defines you. You may still struggle, but the struggle has structure. You know why you're enduring it, and that knowledge prevents you from collapsing under its weight. Responsibility gives meaning to effort, and meaning makes effort sustainable. Responsibility also builds internal stability, which is far more important than external security. External conditions can change without warning: health, finances, relationships, plans. But the ability to respond with discipline and clarity remains if you've trained it. Every responsibility you carry strengthens that internal foundation. You become less reactive, less dependent on perfect conditions, less likely to fall apart when something goes wrong. Over time, this creates a quiet confidence, not because life is easy, but because you know you can face it without turning away. The paradox is that responsibility feels like a burden until you realize it's the thing holding you together. It gives shape to your days, limits to your chaos, and boundaries to your fear. When you take responsibility, you are no longer at the mercy of every emotion or setback. You have a role, a task, a reason to stay upright even when everything feels unstable. Stability doesn't come from having less weight on your shoulders. It comes from being strong enough and willing enough to carry what is yours. Number 3, clarity comes after confrontation. Clarity comes after confrontation, not before it. And this is where most people get stuck. They wait to feel ready, to feel confident, to feel certain that their next step is the right one. They tell themselves they need more time, more information, more motivation. But beneath all of that, waiting is fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of making things worse, fear of seeing something about themselves they'd rather ignore. The mind uses confusion as a shield. It creates endless questions so you never have to face a single uncomfortable answer. Confrontation is uncomfortable because it removes ambiguity. When you confront something, you stop imagining outcomes and start dealing with reality. You face the conversation you've been avoiding, the decision you've been postponing, the truth you've been minimizing. In that moment, confusion collapses into something sharper and more honest. It might not be pleasant, but it's real. Clarity isn't comfort, it's accuracy. And accuracy often stings before it steadies you. Avoidance keeps things emotionally safe, but mentally chaotic. The longer you refuse to confront a problem, the larger it grows in your mind. It becomes abstract, overwhelming, impossible to define. Confrontation shrinks it. Even if the problem remains serious, it becomes specific. You can name it, you can see its boundaries, you can understand your role in it. That understanding is what clarity actually is. It's not knowing everything, it's knowing enough to act without lying to yourself. Confrontation also reveals strength you didn't know you had. When you finally face what you've been running from, you realize that the anticipation was often worse than the reality. The mind exaggerates danger in the absence of action. Once you step forward, fear loses its ability to dominate the narrative. You may still feel anxious, but you're no longer frozen. Movement replaces rumination, and momentum replaces doubt. This is how clarity forms, not as a sudden insight, but as a byproduct of engagement. There is a cost to confrontation, and it's the loss of excuses. Once you see the truth clearly, you can't unsee it. You can no longer claim ignorance or confusion. That responsibility is heavy, but it's also stabilizing. It grounds you in reality instead of fantasy. You stop asking, "What if?" and start asking, "What now?" That shift changes everything. Life becomes less about speculation and more about response, less about avoiding pain and more about choosing the next honest step. Clarity doesn't arrive like a gift. It's earned through the courage to confront what you'd rather keep hidden. Number 4, small discipline beats emotional motivation. Small discipline beats emotional motivation because emotions are unstable by nature. They rise and fall depending on sleep, stress, external validation, and circumstances you can't control. Motivation feels powerful when it's present, but it is unreliable. It convinces you to act only when conditions feel right, when energy is high, when belief is strong. The problem is that the moments when action matters most are rarely the moments when motivation shows up. Waiting to feel inspired hands control of your life over to a passing emotion. Discipline, especially in small forms, works differently. It doesn't ask how you feel, it asks what needs to be done. Small discipline lowers the threshold for action. It doesn't demand transformation or intensity, only consistency. Showing up for 10 minutes, taking one deliberate step, completing a single task without negotiating your way out of it. These actions may seem insignificant, but they build momentum in a way motivation never can. Each small act reinforces identity. You become someone who follows through, even when it's uncomfortable or boring. Emotional motivation is dramatic. It creates spikes of effort followed by long periods of collapse. You feel driven, you overcommit, you exhaust yourself, and then you disappear. Small discipline is quiet and sustainable. It doesn't impress anyone, and it doesn't give instant results, but it compounds. Over time, those small actions accumulate into structure. Structure reduces chaos. Chaos drains energy. By reducing chaos, discipline preserves the energy you need to keep going. This is how progress becomes stable instead of fragile. There is also freedom in small discipline that people often miss. When you remove the question of whether or not you'll act, you free your mind from constant internal debate. You stop bargaining with yourself. You stop wasting energy on self-criticism and guilt. The decision has already been made. This creates mental clarity and emotional steadiness. You may not feel confident, but you feel grounded. That grounded feeling is far more useful than temporary excitement. Small discipline also builds trust with yourself. Every time you keep a small promise, you reinforce the belief that you can rely on your own actions. This self-trust becomes a foundation. When things get difficult, you don't panic as easily because you know you'll show up in some capacity. You don't need to feel motivated to move forward. You've trained yourself to move forward anyway. Over time, motivation begins to follow discipline instead of leading it, appearing as a byproduct of consistent effort rather than a prerequisite. Discipline doesn't eliminate emotion. It stabilizes it by creating forward motion regardless of how you feel. Number 5, suffering can be transformed, but only if you stop treating it as something meaningless or accidental. Most people experience suffering as an interruption to life, as if pain is proof that something has gone wrong. They ask why it happened to them, what they did to deserve it, and how quickly they can escape it. That perspective turns suffering into pure loss. When suffering is seen only as an enemy, it consumes energy without giving anything back. Transformation begins when you recognize that suffering, while unwanted, carries information about what matters, what is fragile, and what must change. Suffering strips away what is superficial. It exposes the limits of comfort, status, and distraction. When things fall apart, the structures you relied on reveal whether they were real supports or temporary crutches. This exposure is brutal, but it is also clarifying. You discover what you value when everything else becomes unbearable. You see which relationships are essential, which habits are destructive, and which beliefs can no longer sustain you. Suffering forces honesty in a way success never does, because success allows you to hide behind results. Transformation requires engagement, not resignation. Enduring suffering passively hardens it into bitterness. Engaging with it turns it into something usable. This doesn't mean romanticizing pain or pretending it's good. It means asking what responsibility suffering places on you. What does it demand that you learn? What behavior can no longer continue? What strength is being asked of you that you haven't yet developed? These questions shift you from helplessness to participation, and participation is where transformation begins. Suffering also refines character through pressure. Just as physical stress reshapes the body, psychological stress reshapes the mind. When you carry suffering consciously, you develop patience, precision, and restraint. You become more careful with your words, your energy, and your choices. You learn the difference between what truly matters and what merely distracts. This refinement is slow and often invisible, but it changes how you respond to life permanently. You don't become immune to pain, you become more capable in its presence. What emerges from transformed suffering is depth. You gain a seriousness that isn't pessimism and a compassion that isn't weakness. You recognize pain in others without being overwhelmed by it because you've learned how to hold your own. This depth creates meaning where there once was only chaos. Suffering does not disappear through transformation. It is reorganized. It becomes integrated into who you are instead of standing in opposition to you. When that integration happens, suffering no longer defines your limits. It defines your capacity to endure, adapt, and carry weight without collapsing. Number 6, meaning is found in endurance. Meaning is found in endurance because lasting value is rarely created in moments of ease. Comfort can feel pleasant, but it doesn't demand anything from you, and what demands nothing rarely gives anything back. Endurance, on the other hand, requires commitment in the absence of reward. It asks you to stay when leaving would be easier, to continue when progress is invisible, and to hold yourself together when there is no immediate reassurance that your effort matters. This is where meaning begins to take shape, not as an idea, but as a lived experience formed through persistence. Endurance forces you to confront time. When something is difficult and prolonged, there is no shortcut, no quick emotional escape. You have to organize yourself around the effort. Your priorities sharpen, distractions lose their appeal, and trivial concerns fall away. What remains is the question of whether you will stay aligned with what you said mattered to you. Each day you endure becomes a quiet reaffirmation of your values. Meaning grows in that repetition, not through intensity, but through consistency over time. There is a difference between surviving and enduring. Surviving is reactive. It is about minimizing damage. Enduring is intentional. It is about carrying something forward with purpose. When you endure, you accept the weight of the situation without allowing it to reduce you to resentment or despair. You don't deny the difficulty, but you also don't allow it to define your identity. This balance is difficult to maintain, and that difficulty is precisely what makes endurance meaningful. It shapes who you become while you're holding on. Endurance also connects you to something larger than your immediate emotions. Feelings fluctuate, but commitment stabilizes. When you choose to endure, you anchor yourself to principles rather than moods. You act in alignment with what you believe is right, even when the emotional payoff is absent. Over time, this creates inner coherence. Your actions and values begin to match, and that alignment produces a sense of integrity that no external validation can replace. What people often mistake for meaning is excitement or fulfillment, but those are temporary states. Meaning is heavier and quieter. It's the result of having carried something difficult without abandoning yourself in the process. It's found in the knowledge that you didn't escape when it hurt, that you remained present when it would have been easier to disappear, and that you became more stable, more grounded, and more capable because you stayed. Endurance doesn't guarantee success, happiness, or recognition, but it creates a depth of experience that gives your life substance and direction even when circumstances remain uncertain. Stand still when it's hard, carry what is yours, even when it feels heavy. Face what's in front of you without turning away. That's how strength, clarity, and meaning are built over time.